Well, Russian troops have massed on their side of the border, carrying out military exercises under the gaze of President Putin. Despite this show of strength, Russia has dismissed reports it has issued a direct threat of force to Ukraine. But the Crimean Peninsula now effectively being under the control of Russian forces. President Obama has warned that Moscow will find itself on the wrong side of history and that Russia's actions violate international law.
Vladimir Putin proudly watching Russian military exercises today. But his eye was on his troops 1,000 miles south, here on the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine. His Air Force controls the skies. His Army controls the roads, borders, and military bases. And his Navy controls the ports and seas surrounding this peninsula. Putin rules in Crimea now, and here is why he did it. Look at Ukraine and Crimea, down in the south there, jutting out into the waters of the Black Sea, home to a critical port the Russian Navy has used for centuries. So Putin, claiming he is defending ethnic Russians in Crimea, has seized and cut off the entire peninsula. Today, President Obama reacted to Putin's moves with scorn.
Russia's on the wrong side of history on this. We are examining a whole series of steps, economic, diplomatic, that will isolate Russia.
The fear tonight that the Ukrainian military or people will try and stop him touching off a bloody war. It's why Secretary of State Kerry is racing to the region, making sure they hold their fire. Because the Russian military would likely crush any resistance from Ukrainian forces.
It's essentially a generation behind in terms of the quality and advancement of its military technology.
Russia's got 845,000 uniformed troops. Ukraine, just 130,000. They're spread throughout the country, and some are pro-Russian who may defect. And Russia's got twice as many tanks, 6 times as many aircraft, 10 times as many ships. Ukrainian troops in Crimea remain bottled up in their bases by Russian soldiers, and as we saw at the Feodosia base, by fiercely pro-Russian Crimean crowds. They stopped us from talking to the trapped Ukrainian Marines inside the base, and they angrily forced us to turn back, providing a jeering escort all the way. Everyone is on edge here. No one knows what tomorrow may bring, except perhaps Vladimir Putin.
Well, President Putin maintains he is defending Russian people and interests in Crimea. Ukraine is often depicted as a fractured country torn between pro-Western territories and those closer to Russia. Let's get more on this now. We're joined by Pete Schmigel from the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations. Nice to have you on the program. Let's get a sense from you about what we're talking about here. When we talk about Ukrainian people, are we talking about a fractured country? Some that want to be pro-West, some want to be pro-Russia, a strong ethnic majority in Crimea, ethnic Russian majority. Give us a sense of the country overall.
Sure, Stan, and good to be with you. Look, I think some of the analysis coming out of the West portraying Ukraine as a very fractured place, as a very divided place, as having a Ukrainian section and a Russian section, or an East and a West, is largely overstated. The reality is, for the last 20 years, Ukraine has been an independent country.
So there's a strong sense of Ukrainian nationalism that trumps any support or any feeling that people may have for Russia?
That's certainly been evident in recent months as Ukrainians of all ethnic persuasions and all religious backgrounds have united together in ousting a dictator and opting for a democratic path. You know, whether it was Russians, Ukrainians, Armenians, Georgians, they were together there on Independence Plaza, acting in a unified fashion for their own future. I think that's the real indicator.
So when Vladimir Putin talks about protecting Russian people and Russian interests, what does he mean?
Yeah, I saw a commentator today refer to that as the Kremlin Kool-Aid. He needs an excuse to justify an illegal act, a military invasion of a foreign country. In 1938, Hitler invaded the Czech lands on the basis that he was protecting native Germans. It was an absolute ruse at the time, and Mr. Putin is taking a page out of that playbook. This is simply a KGB officer who was sworn to protect the old Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, coming up with extraordinary pretexts for invading his neighboring country.
So to that extent, is this less about Ukraine and more about Russian influence, Russian prestige, and the need for Vladimir Putin to present himself as a counterweight to Western power and American power in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a fundamental geopolitical play on Mr. Putin's part. He is seeking to reassert the vestiges of the old Soviet Union, of old Russian imperial control, whether it was South Ossetia and Georgia, whether it was Abkhazia, and now Crimea and eastern Ukraine. This is step by step towards trying to put the Russian Federation back on the world stage. Look, I look at it this way. The West looks at Vladimir Putin as, you know, a normal political leader. That's what we're conditioned to do. He's an ex-colonel of the KGB. He looks at the West as essentially an interference towards his geopolitical ambitions.
And to that extent, the old Cold War chessboard is still very much in play from where he's sitting. Pete, good to have you on the program. Nice to get your perspective on what is happening in Ukraine. Pete Schmigel there from Australian Ukraine Association. Thank you.
Pleasure.